This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 263 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we'll sit down with Zaretta Hammond to explore how we can help students take more ownership of their learning with learn-to-learn skills. One of the primary functions of school is supposed to be to give students the tools to learn on their own, to not have to depend on their teachers forever. If we're doing our jobs right as educators, students will gradually become independent, self-directed learners capable of monitoring, directing, and actively participating in building their own learning. But what if that's not happening? What if year after year, students continue to lean heavily on their teachers for step-by-step instructions on every task, never really taking the learning process into their own hands, and as a result, limiting their growth to only what their teachers happen to spoon-feed them? According to my guest today, this is a problem that's happening in far too many schools, resulting in far too many students who struggle academically, and she's working to solve it. I first became aware of Zaretta Hammond's work in 2015 when I read her book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. She appeared on episode 78 of this podcast, and her name comes up all the time in conversations about how we can close opportunity gaps by building students' cognitive capacity. This year, she has taken that idea of coaching students to become better learners and expanded on it in a new book, Rebuilding Students' Learning Power: Teaching for Instructional Equity and Cognitive Justice. Here's a quote from the book's introduction, where she frames the motivation for her book through the lens of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our response to the pandemic has only complicated and exacerbated the chronic achievement gaps we've been struggling with for decades. Millions of children lost at least a full year or more of schooling because they weren't equipped to be independent learners. We hadn't taught them how to learn in the wild outside the confines of school. The same thinking and practices that got us here won't solve the problem going forward, especially when those practices ignore a central mechanism that generates institutional inequity: the underdevelopment of historically marginalized students' cognition. When it comes to liberatory education, learn-to-learn skills are the hidden curriculum some students get and others don't. Over time, this hidden curriculum has created a cognitive red line hiding in plain sight in too many schools. This book is a how-to guide for the teacher who wants to build their will, skill, knowledge, and capacity as a responsive educator who helps dependent learners rebuild their learning power. In the book, Hammond makes her case by building a historical context for how we got here, then outlines a process teachers can follow to build that learning power in students. Part of that process is teaching students 5 core learn-to-learn skills that she wrote about in a guest post for Cult of Pedagogy, and that she'll share in this episode. But before you listen, it's important to keep in mind that these are not just plug-and-play strategies. In our conversation, Hammond says there is a process for introducing them to students, coaching students through them. These are not things that you're just going to take off the shelf and give to students. You have to create the conditions. In the interview and her article, she shares that process as well. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Foundry 10 for sponsoring this episode. Teens want to learn more social media literacy in school, but too often what they get sounds like an outdated PSA. Don't share personal info. Avoid strangers. So how can educators make the lessons more relevant? Foundry 10 is an education research organization that blends research and practice to make a real difference for real youth today, while deepening understanding about effective teaching strategies. Through applied research, they are studying everything from social media literacy instruction to soft skills and career-connected learning to supporting number knowledge with dramatic play. They generate insights from impactful practices, expand ideas about learning, and create immediate value for youth, educators, schools, and community-based organizations. If you're looking for fresh research-backed ideas you can apply in your classroom, visit www.foundry10.org/cultofpedagogy. That's foundry10.org/cultofpedagogy. Support also comes from School AI. Teaching 27 students means 27 different starting points and 27 different needs. School AI helps you meet every single one. With School AI, every student gets their own AI tutor that adapts to exactly where they are. Writing an essay? One student gets help organizing their first paragraph, while another gets feedback on strengthening their thesis statement. Same assignment, personalized support. And while your students are getting what they need, you're getting real-time insights into who needs you most right now. Plus, School AI streamlines your administrative work, parent emails, translations, lesson prep, so you spend less time on tasks and more time with students. It's all student safe and designed to give you more time for what matters most, connecting with your students. School AI makes school awesome, one student story at a time. Learn more at schoolai.com. Now here's my conversation with Zaretta Hammond about learn-to-learn skills. Zaretta, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a minute.
It really has. It's been quite a while, but I have known about this new book for a little bit from you. And so we were just sort of waiting for the right time to talk about it. So before we get into our topic for the day, just tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and the work that you do in education.
Yeah, I am a former teacher, classroom teacher. I taught writing when I was in the classroom, so I always kind of hold that stance. I am a consultant. I work with teams of teachers and instructional coaches, really in trying to improve that instructional core and kind of the work with students in that. Teacher educator. And author, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, and this newest book, Rebuilding Students' Learning Power.
Yes, and that is where I was going to go next. So the last time you were on, we were talking about culturally responsive teaching in the brain, which since you and I have talked about it, I have heard so many people in the last, since 2014, the last 11 years, always refer back to that book. I think it really was just such a seminal work in education. So tell me a little bit about the new book and what prompted you to write it. How does it connect to your previous work?
Yeah.
All that.
It's interesting because the seeds of this book were there before Culturally Responsive Teaching in the
Mm,
Brain. And so what prompted me to really kind of sit down and write it was culturally responsive teaching in the brain was really trying to help people understand the science of learning that undergirds culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy.
mhm,
That wasn't happening. People were relegating it to motivational self-esteem or SEL and relational stuff or
mhm,
anti-racist
mhm,
education. There are elements of all of that in there, but what people really miss was the fact that the core of culturally responsive pedagogy is helping students become powerful learners.
mhm,
And this is chapter 8 of that book. And what I wanted to do is really help people who I saw were struggling to kind of close the knowing doing gap. How do you actually get students to own their learning? And
mhm,
you have students who, are taking leadership in the classroom as we give them more voice and choice. But then you have a larger number of students who are just kind of on the periphery and teachers are kind of frustrated. And so
mhm,
I wanted to write something that got underneath kind of that how do you do this? What are the core things we're doing? How does the science of learning, or what people are also calling learning sciences, really
mhm,
help us with that process without reducing it to brain-based strategies? So it really
mhm,
was trying to give a roadmap, recipe book, if you will,
mhm,
playbook to
mhm.
the detail of how you do that.
And so, yes. And I do remember when we talked about culturally responsive teaching in the brain, I remember you nudging kind of constantly in the conversation, like it really is about sort of the neuroscience and getting them to be better thinkers and getting them to be, better academically. That's where we're really going to make a big difference for kids in terms of their own opportunities. Um, so one of the approaches that you share in this book is teaching students learn to learn skills. This is what you call them in the book. How do you define these? Why are they important? And how do they serve as a tool for actually closing that opportunity gap?
Yeah, I think it's important because one of the core tenets of cognitive neuroscience and learning
Mm,
is the fact that only the learner learns. And so the
hmm
degree to which we actually help students with the craftsmanship of learning, that's what Ron Berger of EL Education calls it. And that's at the heart of how students are going to improve, right? Helping that brain turn random facts and figures, the content we want students to engage with, into usable knowledge. Natalie Wexler talks about this a lot, right? Building background knowledge is really important, but
hmm
you can't just pour it into students' heads. It has to be chewed through our information processing cycle.
hmm
But students don't get a lot of opportunity to do that. And so I wanted to kind of show how we can get started with that because it seems so big. Like, where do I get started?
Yeah.
Well, to get started with these kind of core foundational moves or cognitive routines that every
hmm
brain goes through. And we can see students who are underperforming have these very underdeveloped, and so it's about being conspicuous and explicit with them. Ron
Mm.
Rickard talks about making thinking visible, and it's more than just, oh, thinking routines, give that to the student. This is literally helping students kind of have a brain gym so they can grow their dendrites and grow their own systems for turning inert information into usable knowledge.
So, what you have done, and for people listening, is you've actually written a guest post for Cult of Pedagogy where you have actually sort of explored these 5 different learn to learn skills. And so, what we're going to do now is have you actually walk us through those skills, and so that people listening can start to share these with their students, and hopefully they will also get the whole book, but they can take these 5 and start to apply them in the classroom.
Well,
So,
yeah, I want to walk them through, but here's the
mhm.
thing I will say, because I think it's really important to understand that these are not things that you're just going to take off the shelf and give to students.
Mhm.
Like, you have to create the conditions no more than a sports coach would just say, you just came from the NBA draft and now I'm going to put you in the championship game. Like, there is grooming and development. And so, we can talk a little bit about that a little later, but I want to just preface it with, here are kind of the core moves, and there is
Mhm.
a process for introducing them to students, coaching
Mhm.
students through them. So yeah, you may not just like, oh, I'm going to start using these on Monday.
Yeah.
But you certainly can start seeding the conditions, and we can talk about that. But let's just kind of walk through what they are. The
Okay.
first one is called size it up and break it down. It's got
Okay.
actually a combo move in there. And what does
Mhm.
that mean? It really is about task analysis. So a lot of students don't actually become metacognitive about what
Mm.
the task is asking. So we have a tendency to try to get to the right answer or move through the content.
Yeah.
This asks the student to kind of slow that process and literally just do task analysis. What is this asking me to do? Um, you
Mhm.
know, what's my next move? What are the best strategies that I need to use? This is more than executive function. This
Right.
is literally the first part of information processing. So the
Mhm.
the second part of the move is break it down. So now, I'm sizing it up. I've analyzed that task. Now I'm going to break it down. What is it require me to do? What strategies or moves or other content I already know that I now want to bring into the mix to help me kind of tackle this, right? It's like
Mhm.
getting ready to cook. You get
Mm.
your recipe out, you look and see what it is. Do I have everything I need? Okay, how long is this going to take? You analyze. You don't literally start like, I'm just going to pour it in the bowl and I'm like reading no instructions.
Yeah.
I'm not. So in many ways, in other parts of our lives, it calls for this kind of, pause, task analysis.
Yeah.
Okay, now what do I need to do? Right? The break it down would be, do I have all the ingredients? Do I have the right equipment? If I were continuing with the recipe analogy. So in learning, it's the same thing. And a lot of dependent learners, students who are dependent on the teacher to do that kind of cognitive lifting, don't really know that they should do that. They're just dutiful, like do the worksheet
Yeah.
now. And so they do it. So
Right.
that's that first one, right? Getting students to actually just pay attention and not,
Right.
compliance, but literally like what's going on? What is this
Yeah.
asking you to do? So that's the very first move. The next move is scan the hard drive, right? One
Hmm.
of the core principles of learning, the brain must couple new content with existing funds of knowledge, right?
Hmm.
This is where background knowledge is so important, or what you already know about it. Even if it's just tangential or, yes, heard it in a movie, it doesn't matter. What that process does is fires the brain's neurons and synapses so it becomes ready to receive new content. And if
Hmm.
that doesn't happen, no learning will happen. It doesn't matter how, compliant the student is. So scanning the hard drive is really asking that series of questions. Where have I seen this before? Oh, this is new. Do I know a similar concept that
Hmm.
might be related to that? What seems to be the opposite of this? So there should be almost like a protocol of questions that the student can ask him or herself that really starts this process of, oh, I already know something about it. Now that mixing can happen, right? And so that
Mm-hmm.
takes us to that next move, chew and remix. So now this idea of information processing is the working memory really has to grapple. It has to rub, ideas together, has to try and unpack complexities or conflicting information. So this is productive struggle, right? And so we really want students to look for patterns or to kind of see how things are connected. What are the relationship between things? And that whole process is what gives content meaning. So that
Mm.
meaning making is what's going to allow the student to actually grasp the kind of concepts that are being presented. Then, of course, there's engage in skillful practice. So, as students are getting, you know, deeper into the content, then there are probably some skills related to that they want to be deliberate in practicing, or
Mm-hmm.
conceptual understanding they'll want to review. And the final move is called make it sticky. So this corresponds to the consolidation
Mm.
part of information processing. And this is kind of moving it to our long term memory. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people will use retrieval practice
Mm-hmm.
here, and that's a really popular strategy, but you can't retrieve things that you haven't committed to memory.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the part of moving it into long-term memory and knowing that path back to it, right? And
Yeah.
then the retrieval practice helps you to kind of create a well-worn path back to it so that that information, that understanding is at your fingertips, so to speak. So those are the
Yeah.
five moves, right? And so again, students can put them in various combinations. There are more that expand, but these are like the core. I call them the big five.
Right. In the article too, you differentiate between a move and a skill, and you describe these five as moves, correct?
Yes, each one is a move. Learn to learn is a skill set, right? It's a skill that my
Mm-hmm.
ability to learn new content is a skill. And here's the thing I think is really important. We don't know how AI is going to change the future. We don't know kind of how
Mm.
knowledge is going to go. It's already turning over every 18 months. There's new things and
Yep.
old knowledge is obsolete. So this is a skill set students will have to kind of, you know, thrive in the future. And so if we are kind of creating learning environments learning environments where some kids aren't getting this, then we're just kind of feeding the achievement and the opportunity gaps. So, yeah, the move is, one of these discrete practices,
Mm-hmm.
and it is kind of like a dance move or a chess move, right? One chess move is not the whole game. Whole
Right.
game could be several moves, but
Mm-hmm.
same thing with a skill, right? Ball
Mm-hmm.
handling and ball basketball is a move, but it's part of. I mean, dribbling is
Right.
a move, but it's part of ball handling skills. There are probably a few
Right.
other things that you want to be able to do
Right.
as part of that. So I think it's a distinction because this is why the recommendation is not just to take these and say, oh, I'm going to just start giving them to students, because until we really understand how to coach students in them,
Mm-hmm.
then students usually will not use them, right?
Right.
Because
Right. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Before we do, just for people listening, I'm going to recap these and just give my own kind of summary, and you tell me if I understand them right. And this is going to be explained in more detail in the post that you wrote. So, move one is size it up and break it down. This is where the student is actually assessing the task and deciding what's required before they get started. Move two is scan the hard drives, where they're sort of connecting it to existing funds of knowledge, figuring out if it's similar to anything they've learned, and just getting a sense for like, what is this task? Do I know anything already that I can bring to it? Move three is chew and remix, which is elaborating on the content a little bit, trying to understand where they have questions. Is it connected to, well, you've got questions for each one of these. I think the chew and remix is the one that I think I have a little bit more hard time understanding, like what they're actually doing at that time. Are they asking themselves questions?
now, usually they're not just asking themselves questions.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the teacher's instruction would be integrating that into kind of an instructional practice. So
Okay.
now, with the content, like here are dates in history, let's just take social studies, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do these dates have in common? So this
Mm.
now, what actually, when we see a lot of Venn diagrams or we see a lot of graphic organizers, the students are processing that and they are trying to see patterns, make connections, grasp the concepts in it, like we call that
Mm-hmm.
conceptual understanding. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is hard for people because we want to make it an activity when it is a cognitive routine that any
Mm-hmm.
independent learner is doing because it's invisible to us. And what we're trying to do is externalize it. So they're not just elaborating, but they're grappling. So this is a
Yes.
part of productive struggle. And we keep using that word, and nobody's actually understanding what do I need to have students struggle with. And here's what we know: the brain grows, dendrites, right? Gets stronger, that neuroplasticity, just like muscles. Like you got to
Mm-hmm.
give it a heavier weight. You got to give it something to struggle against
Mm-hmm.
in order to actually create the kind of cognitive friction that leads to understanding. And that's where the grappling, that's where the productive struggle. But typically, what I see is there's not a lot of struggling. It's just kind of answer this question or
Yes.
do this thing. There's not the kind of friction required for new kind of cognitive growth to happen. So
Mm-hmm.
this chew and remix is more than elaboration. It is
Mm-hmm.
literally grappling. That would be the word I would use
Okay.
to actually understand that. Now, and I break that down in the book as to what would you putting in front of the students. But
Yeah.
there's a lot already out that allows us. This is kind of at the heart of deeper learning. This is kind of at
Right.
the heart of some project-based learning,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are ways that we can do both of those that kind of takes the friction out. And if
Yes.
we take the friction out because we want it to be, simpler for students, or we don't want them to be too frustrated, we are actually kind of interrupting the important part of their growth. So
Right.
that's what chew and remix is.
Okay. I wrote a post a long time ago called "To Learn, Students Need to Do Something." And it was about this space between just information delivery and assessment. And I saw my kids getting information, then getting a test. And I was like, but they have to do something in between. They've got to do some kind of processing.
That's right.
So yeah. Okay.
That's right.
um, And so that's 3, chew and remix. And then the 4th is engage in skillful practice, which is more of and I guess the question that comes up is this is very obvious when it comes to things like writing and math and skill-based things. But what does that actual practice look like when we are just studying a historical period or something like that?
Well, I think when you start to think about the student kind of monitoring their own learning, they can
Mm-hmm.
actually see, oh, maybe if I'm not grasping a concept or I'm
Mm-hmm.
not seeing patterns, I need to practice that discrete move, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, if I'm in a conversation, there's lots of talk, or we set up Socratic seminars, and I'm
Okay.
asking low level questions, maybe I need to actually crank that up. Maybe I need to kind of lean into the friction. So, this is where teachers are actually creating those kind of instructional activities and
Mm.
practices. Where students are actually having to kind of grapple with things. And the student needs to pay attention to, am I continually taking a wrong turn? Why am I not getting this? So
Mm.
that is the skillful practice is like, I'm good with scanning the hard drive, but coming to the chew and remix, I need to actually work on that in relationship to understanding how these historical events are all related, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Got
now
it.
this is the student doesn't have to set that up on his own, but this
Okay.
should be part of what the teacher is designing instruction for, not lesson planning, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes lesson planning these days is just here's a list of activities we're doing, and we call that
Mm-hmm.
lesson planning versus
Mm-hmm.
instructional design. Am I designing for students to have some cognitive friction where they
Yeah.
are, looking at the complexity of something? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the wonderful thinking routines that Ron Rickard has is called parts, purposes, and complexities. Right. The student's ability to look at that, but that should be internalized. It shouldn't have to be that the teacher has to give the student that thinking routine. Over time, we
Mm-hmm.
want those to become just the way we look at things. What is
Mm-hmm.
this? Let me kind of grapple with its complexities. What patterns do I see? Right.
Okay.
And so getting better at that learn to learn that turns that content into something different,
Mm-hmm.
something usable. And the biggest challenge is these learn to learn practices aren't done separately. They are the way that the student actually engages the content.
Got it. So the very last move is just making it sticky. And this is that taking what they've already learned and then finding pathways back to it, whether it's through retrieval practice or some other consolidation practice.
That's right.
Hey, this is Jen. I am going to interrupt this episode for just a minute to tell you about something I think will be a big help to you as an educator, whether you're a teacher, a school leader, an instructional coach, or even someone studying to become a teacher. It's something I've been publishing for the last 10 years called The Teacher's Guide to Tech, and it's basically an encyclopedia of tech tools curated especially for teachers. My team and I keep an eye on all the tech tools that are out there, the ones that are fresh and new, and the ones that have stood the test of time, and we think about how they can best be used in classrooms. Then we sort them into categories, give you a really simple description of what each one does, provide a link to the tool's website so you can check it out, and we also pick out a video that shows the tool in action so you can understand quickly how it works and if it will work for you. And because tech changes all the time, we have to maintain these listings to make sure they stay fresh and accurate. On top of that, we have a really nice collection of articles we've written that will help you explore more ways to use tech and fine-tune and troubleshoot things as you go along. Plus, there's a huge glossary of tech terms to help you stay current with the language. In the past, this guide was published as a PDF that we updated once a year. Although this worked fine, that PDF would stay the same all year until the new edition came out. In January of 2025, we moved the entire guide to a fully online subscription-based model. This allows us to update it all year round, keeping it fresh and new all the time. A year's subscription costs exactly the same as the PDF used to cost, so we haven't raised the price one bit, and it's even more affordable if you get it as a group. To learn more about how this guide can help you become the most tech-savvy teacher in your school, visit teachersguidetotech.com. And I think one of the things you just said a little while ago is that it's not up to the student necessarily to initiate every single one of these moves, but to know what's happening when they're in it, that the teacher could be the one initiating it?
No, I think
Maybe I misunderstood that. Yeah.
no, I think just reading the post, right? But it's certainly
Mhm.
going into it in the book. The whole
Mm,
point is that in order to be an independent learner, you don't want someone external to have to prompt these. So
okay.
what we're talking about, part of the process is for the teacher to introduce them to the students in, a low level way, get the student to kind of think about and talk about, engage with
Mhm.
them, and then start using them as they are teaching their content and helping students kind of internalize that content. But at some point, in order to get students to be kind of more powerful learners, as I talk about this, and an independent learner, the student has to self initiate these because this is
Okay.
typically what happens, past fourth grade into fifth, sixth, seventh. Teachers not prompting all the time. We call that over scaffolding. If
Okay.
you're the one prompting all the time, then the student, when they're in college, is not going to do this themselves because the college instructor or professor won't be prompting you.
Right. Okay. And that's actually going to be our next question anyway, is that, you do recommend in the book and in the post that you write is that, students should be taught to move them on their own and you use the moves on their own. And then you actually give a set of recommendations for how teachers can make that happen.
Yeah. I think I go beyond recommendations. So,
Okay.
recommendations is, oh, try these things. I try to lay out a roadmap and
Mm.
a process, right? So, for example, I outline in detail 3 to 4 sessions to actually introduce these to the students. So the first
Mhm.
is onboarding them into a cognitive apprenticeship. I talk about how to write your own script. What are you saying to the students, right? There are several parts to that. Getting students to actually just talk about their own learning moves so that they can see, where do these fit? Where am I already doing this and I can just do it better? Or where is this totally missing in the way in which I am processing the content that
Mhm.
the teacher is giving me? And then three, script those moves for the student so that the student can actually see, oh, this is the one I should use right now. Microdosing them into and integrating them into lesson planning. Building habitual use, here are the steps to do that. And then checking for internalization. Rather than checking for understanding, you want to
Mhm.
check that the student actually knows what that move is, knows when to use it, and can show you, this is how I use this to kind of move through the content for our lesson in our unit. These should be parallel to content standards. We call these process standards. So the
Okay.
process standards augment the student's ability to get to the content standards,
Right.
right? And so these aren't recommendations. It is literally a roadmap. Here's what you do. Here's the agenda for the session one. This should be
Mhm.
over a 4 to 6 week period because what I
Mhm.
find is if it's just recommendations, then teachers still don't know the specific things to do, the steps. What am I looking for? What am I, you know, checking for to
Yes.
move students through that? Because it's not what we're currently doing. So I wanted to be a little more prescriptive
Yeah.
in terms of teachers building their capacity to coach students. You're not just giving them and leaving them. You are literally coaching students in how to do this. And most
Mhm.
teachers don't know that because they are not teaching students how to learn. They are just teaching their content.
Mm. Yeah, and we really haven't most of us have never seen this done either, and I think if so many teachers teach the way they were taught or some variation on that, so if you've never seen it, it would be hard to just kinda come up with it unless somebody prescribes that for you.
That's true. And at the same time, I see it in terms of, classrooms that are really run well. And I
Mhm.
see it when, it is focused around building capacity. For example, I am working with Linda Darling Hammond right now. We're doing some, review of teacher education programs. Um,
Mm.
I am on a team and we go into high tech high and look at their
Mm.
teachers and how they kind of build the capacity for project-based learning. That's one of their signature
Right.
practices, right? And they totally understand this idea that you have to give students the skills of moving through this versus let's just do a project, pick your project, and now the teacher's moving them through. So there are places that are already doing this. The Deeper Learning Network, they're doing a
Mm-hmm.
version of this as well. But typically in our, mainstay districts, those are not the way everyday teaching and learning
Yes.
are happening. So I would agree with you, but it's not so unknowable. This is
Right.
actually the way teaching from the beginning was set up. But, over time, we've kind of drifted away from the idea of teaching students how to learn over kind of content and standards and pacing guides.
Yes.
Um, you know, so we understand kind of how that situation is where teachers may be unfamiliar with this. It's not
Mm-hmm.
because they aren't dedicated to teaching. It's just no one
Yeah.
showed them this.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, what you've just described is sort of just in general the ways that teachers can get students to own these skills and start learning them independently. And in the post that you've written, you go into more of a step by step process. So, I would encourage people to look at that and then also obviously go to the book, which is going to go even more in depth. Before we close up, what else would you like to share with listeners?
I think that this is an opportunity for us to not just go strategy stripping. That's what I call it in
Yes.
the book, right? Because again, we read, but we really just like, I'm just looking for kind of activities for that I can bring to
Yep.
the classroom.
Yep.
And I think that is leading us in this kind of circular path. We're in and out of inequity. We're having all this talk about equity, but we're doing things that keep leading us to inequitable outcomes for students. Back
Mm,
to that idea of only the learner learns, and that these are things that aren't just something to bring in as an activity. I think that's something that we're going to have to let go of. And this is back to the idea of craftsmanship of learning. But for teachers, it's about being in that professional learning community, right? Where we are constantly thinking about our craft. In the book, I talk about the idea that law students are initiated into their craft, the legal
mm,
profession. They're taught how to think in that way a lawyer thinks. It's called the IRAC formula, right?
mm.
Residents in hospitals, they are
Mhm,
taught how to be diagnosticians. But we don't do that for teachers. And I think
mhm.
this is back in the day. Lee Schulman talked about content, pedagogical content knowledge, and teachers kind of coming together. DeFord talked about the idea of professional learning communities, and that's more than a data meeting. That is really
Mhm.
about talking about our craft. I'm so excited because right now I'm working with a couple of teams of teachers, and that's what we're doing. We're kind of re energizing kind of their practice because we're talking about instruction, not just talking about an activity, but like how do
Right.
we get that student to kind of lean into that? And they pick a set of focal students that they are looking at and tracking that are representative of a larger number in their classroom. So
Mhm.
this is teachers need their own apprenticeship, right? Not because
Yeah.
they are doing anything bad, but because we can all level up. So
Yes.
the encouragement is kind of, find partners who want to start talking about instruction in addition to kind of partnering with students in a way that we're being honest, like we're here to help you kind of reach your full potential. Sports coaches do this. they,
Yeah.
they don't not talk to the player. They actually say, hey, here's what I think you're really strong at. Here's where we can build on some of your challenges or maybe the weak areas. You can make those stronger. They try to help that player, continuously level up. But we don't have those conversations with students. And
Mm.
sometimes we just lean into the students that are already independent learners. So now they're the leaders and people are coming in and from the outside talking to those students. What about the students that are kind of on the margins? That's
Mhm.
what I want us to really look at. Can we study those students, pull them into a learning partnership, give them the skills that will serve them for the rest of their life to be powerful learners.
Where can people find you online? What's the best place for them to go if they want to learn more from you?
They can always connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I love, getting a direct message, just
Mm-hmm.
connect there. Ready for Rigor, got a new, updated website coming on. And that's always a place to get on my newsletter because,
Mm-hmm. Is
I'm
that
always
readyforrigor.com?
readyforrigor.com.
Okay.
And yeah, I have a newsletter that goes out once a month, really kind of lifting up the science of learning
Mm.
and trying to make that connection in a practical way that allows us to kind of build our capacity. So those are the two main places. I'm still
Okay.
on X, so I don't know how I feel
Some of us
about that, but
still
I
have old accounts just still sitting there gathering dust. That's what mine is doing. Yeah.
absolutely.
It's mostly there so that no one else takes it over and uses it
That is the
for
truth.
harm.
And of course, Instagram, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a new place where I want to share more of the content around the book. I'm going to start doing some chapter chats. So definitely get on the
Oh,
newsletter,
nice. Okay.
learn more about that because it's so rich with details and how to. And, it's
Yeah.
I'm going to read it, on, in one night and strip some stuff from it. This is
Right.
kind of, get some folks together and really think about parts of the practice that you want to improve. So I'm super excited to see how it goes. Culturally responsive teaching the brain sold 700,000 copies.
I believe it. I believe
And
it.
I don't know what this little book is going to do, but it really is my kind of love letter to teachers. They do such a awesome job. It is just an enormous job, and I wanted to provide them more tools to do it even better.
So the book is called Rebuilding Students' Learning Power, Teaching for Instructional Equity and Cognitive Justice. And Zaretta Hammond, you are becoming a giant in this field. And so I'm very excited that you have a new book that you're so excited about, because that means it's probably dense and high quality and that people are going to get a lot from it for as many years as they've been getting from the first book. So thank you so much for giving me your time today.
Thank you for having me.
To read Zaretta's post and get links to purchase Rebuilding Students' Learning Power, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 263. To get a regular email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, products, and speaking services, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.